My boss fired me because I was late one time. I never thought I would lose my job over one mistake. I had been working at the local grocery store for over 3 years, and I loved my job. My boss, Mr. Johnson, was always fair, understanding, and easy to work with. He never gave me a hard time, and I always felt appreciated for the hard work I put in. But all of that changed last week when I showed up to work late. I had set my alarm for the wrong time, and I didn't wake up until an hour after I was supposed to be at work. I rushed to get ready, but by the time I arrived, Mr. Johnson was already waiting for me at the front entrance. He had a stern look on his face, and I knew something was wrong. "Where have you been?" he asked, his voice sharp and disapproving. "I'm sorry, sir. I overslept." "It won't happen again," I replied, trying to sound as sincere as possible. "I'm afraid it's too late for apologies," he said, shaking his head. "You know our policy on lateness, and I can't make exceptions for anyone. I'm sorry, but I have to let you go." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Fired. For being late once. It seemed so unfair, especially after all the hard work I had put in over the years. I pleaded with Mr. Johnson, begging him to reconsider, but he wouldn't budge. He simply handed me my final paycheck and wished me luck in finding another job. I left the store feeling angry, frustrated, and hopeless. How was I going to pay my bills? What was I going to tell my parents? I had been so confident that I would be able to keep my job for a long time, but now everything had fallen apart in an instant. The next few days were a blur of job applications, phone calls, and interviews. I scoured the internet for any job openings in my area and sent out dozens of resumes, but it seemed like nobody was interested in hiring a 19-year-old kid with no college degree and minimal work experience. I felt like giving up, but I knew I couldn't afford to. I had to keep looking, keep trying, and keep believing that something would come through eventually. And it did, although not in the way I had expected. One day, I received a call from Mr. Johnson himself. He sounded apologetic, and I could tell he was struggling to find the right words. "I made a mistake," he said finally. "I was too hard on you, and I shouldn't have fired you over one mistake. You were a great employee, and I should have given you a second chance." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Was this really happening? Had Mr. Johnson changed his mind and decided to rehire me? "I want to offer you your job back," he said. "If you're willing to forgive me and come back to work, I promise to make it up to you." I didn't hesitate for a second. I accepted his offer, and within a few days, I was back at my old job, working alongside my coworkers and feeling grateful for the second chance I had been given. Things were different this time around. Mr. Johnson was more lenient, more understanding, and more supportive than ever before. He went out of his way to make sure I felt appreciated and valued, and he even gave me a raise to make up for the time I had lost. I realized then that sometimes, even the best bosses make mistakes, but what sets them apart from the rest is their ability to recognize their mistakes and make amends for them. I learned a valuable lesson from my experience that even in the face of adversity, it's important to keep pushing forward and not give up. With my renewed sense of purpose, I worked harder than ever before. I showed up on time every day, went above and beyond in my duties, and took every opportunity to learn and grow as an employee. And as a result, I was soon promoted to a supervisory position where I was able to mentor and train new hires. So to anyone out there who may be going through a difficult time at work, I say this: don't give up. Keep pushing forward, keep striving for excellence, and most importantly, keep believing in yourself. Because even in the darkest of times, there's always a glimmer of hope and a chance for redemption. What are your thoughts on this story? Let me know in the comments below. Story 2. My sneaky boss steals my tips. I've been working as a delivery driver for Pizza Palace for almost a year now. It's not the most glamorous job, but it pays my bills and keeps me fed. Plus, the tips can be pretty decent on a good day. That is, until I found out that my sneaky boss had been stealing my hard-earned tips. It all started when I noticed that my tips were consistently lower than they should have been. At first, I thought it was just a slow week or that people were being stingy with their money. But as the weeks went by, the amount of tips I received just kept getting smaller and smaller. I couldn't figure out what was going on. I was always polite to customers and made sure their orders were delivered on time and with a smile. But no matter how hard I worked, my tips just kept disappearing. Then one day, I saw my boss, Tony, rifling through the tip jar when he thought no one was looking. At first, I couldn't believe it. I had always thought Tony was a decent guy. He had been friendly and helpful to me when I first started working there. But now, I realized that he was a sneaky thief. I confronted him about it the next day, but he just shrugged it off and told me that he was just borrowing the money and that he would pay me back. I knew that was a lie. He had no intention of ever giving me my tips back. I started keeping a closer eye on him after that. Every time I saw him near the tip jar, I would make a point to watch him. And every time, he would quickly move away as soon as he realized I was there. I didn't know what to do. I needed the job, but I couldn't let Tony continue to steal from me. I decided to talk to some of the other drivers and see if they had noticed anything strange going on. It turns out, I wasn't the only one. Several other drivers had also noticed that their tips were disappearing. We knew we had to do something about it. We decided to confront Tony together. We told him that we knew what he had been doing and that we wanted our tips back. At first, he denied it, but when we told him that we had been keeping a close eye on him, he finally admitted to taking our tips. He apologized and promised to pay us back. And to his credit, he did. He gave each of us the money he had stolen and promised to never do it again. I was relieved that it was all over, but I couldn't help but feel angry and betrayed. I had trusted Tony, and he had taken advantage of me. It was hard to work for someone who had stolen from me, but I needed the job. Despite everything, I continued to work at Pizza Palace. I kept a closer eye on Tony in the tip jar, but things seemed to have gone back to normal. My tips were once again what they should have been, and Tony had kept his promise to never steal from us again. It wasn't the easiest thing to deal with, but I was glad that I had stood up for myself and my fellow drivers. We had worked hard for our tips, and no one had the right to take them away from us. Looking back on it now, I realized that it was a learning experience. I learned that not everyone can be trusted, even if they seem friendly and helpful. And I learned that it's important to speak up when something isn't right. If I hadn't confronted Tony, he may have continued to steal from us for a long time. In the end, I'm just glad that justice was served and that Tony learned his lesson. And now, every time I deliver a pizza to a customer, I make sure to give them the best service possible. I know that their tips are a way of showing their appreciation for my hard work, and I'm grateful for every penny. But I still keep an eye on Tony. I know that he's capable of doing sneaky things, and I don't want to let my guard down. I've learned to trust my instincts and to be more cautious around people I don't know very well. Despite the initial shock and betrayal, I'm grateful for the experience. It taught me to be more aware of my surroundings and to stand up for myself when something isn't right. And even though I'll never fully trust Tony again, I'm glad that I was able to get my tips back and that justice was served. How did you feel about that story? Let me know in the comments below. Story 3. My grumpy psychiatrist said she hates giving me therapy. I sat in the waiting room, tapping my foot anxiously on the ground. Today was the day I had been dreading for weeks, my therapy session. I had been seeing my psychiatrist, Dr. Smith, for a few months now, but I still couldn't shake off the nervousness that came with every visit. I had always struggled with anxiety and depression, and my parents had finally convinced me to seek help. They said it was the best thing for me, but I didn't see how talking to a stranger about my problems could fix anything. As I sat in the small, cramped room, I heard the door open and looked up to see Dr. Smith enter. She was a tall, imposing woman with a stern look on her face. I could feel my anxiety starting to rise as she sat down across from me. "Hello, Sarah," she said in a monotone voice. "How are you feeling today?" I shrugged. "Not great, to be honest." She looked at me for a moment before sighing. "You know, Sarah, I have to be honest with you. I'm finding it increasingly difficult to give you therapy. I hate to say it, but you're just so boring." My heart sank. Boring. Was that really what she thought of me? I had always thought I was an interesting person, with plenty of stories to tell. "I'm sorry," I muttered, not knowing what else to say. Dr. Smith leaned forward. "Look, Sarah, I know you're struggling, but you have to help me help you. You can't just sit here and expect me to do all the work. You need to open up to me, tell me what's really going on in your life." I nodded, feeling ashamed. Maybe she was right. Maybe I wasn't trying hard enough. For the rest of the session, I tried my best to talk about my problems. I told her about my job, my relationship with my family, and my struggles with anxiety. But every time I spoke, I couldn't shake off the feeling that she was judging me. As the session drew to a close, Dr. Smith gave me a small smile. "See, that wasn't so hard, was it?" I didn't know what to say. Part of me was relieved that the session was over, but another part of me was angry. How dare she call me boring? How dare she judge me when she barely knew me? But despite my anger, I knew that she was right. I had been holding back, afraid to really open up and be vulnerable. Maybe if I tried harder, things would get better. The next few sessions were tough. I tried my best to open up to Dr. Smith, but every time I spoke, I felt like she was judging me. Her comments were always blunt and to the point, and I often left the sessions feeling worse than when I arrived. But slowly, things started to change. As I opened up more, Dr. Smith began to show more empathy and understanding. She listened to my problems and helped me work through them. I started to feel like I was making progress, like maybe things could get better. One day, towards the end of our session, Dr. Smith surprised me. "You know, Sarah, I have to say, I'm really proud of you. You've come a long way since we first started working together." I looked at her, surprised. "Really?" She nodded. "Yes, really. You've been working hard, and it shows. I know I can be tough on you, but it's only because I care. I want to see you succeed." For the first time, I felt a genuine connection with my psychiatrist. I knew that she was still gruff and blunt, but I could see that she genuinely cared about me and my progress. I began to look forward to our sessions, eager to see what progress I could make. As the months went by, I continued to make progress. My anxiety and depression didn't disappear overnight, but I began to learn how to manage them. I started to feel more confident in myself and my abilities, and I knew that I had Dr. Smith to thank for it. Looking back, I realized that our journey together was far from perfect. Dr. Smith was tough on me, and her initial comments about me being boring hurt. But I also realized that those comments were what I needed to hear. They pushed me to be more vulnerable and open, and they ultimately led me to where I am today. I still see Dr. Smith on occasion, and I always leave our sessions feeling grateful for her help. I know that I wouldn't be where I am today without her guidance and support. And while she may be grumpy and blunt, I also know that she cares deeply about her patients and their progress. So, to anyone out there who may be struggling with mental health issues, I want to say this: therapy isn't easy, and sometimes it's not even pleasant. But it's worth it. It's worth the discomfort, the vulnerability, and the hard work. Because in the end, it can change your life. And if you're lucky enough to find a therapist like Dr. Smith, who will push you to be your best self, hold on to them. They may be grumpy, but they're also life-changing. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Story 4. My dad won't let me go on school field trips. Growing up, I always loved going on school field trips. It was a chance to get out of the classroom, explore new places, and spend time with my friends. But as I got older, things started to change. My dad became more overprotective, and he wouldn't let me go on any school field trips. At first, I didn't understand why he was doing this, but as time went on, I began to resent him for it. I'm currently a 17-year-old high school student, and the upcoming school trip is to a museum that I've been dying to visit for years. But when I brought it up to my dad, he shut me down immediately. He said that school field trips are a waste of time and money and that I should focus on my studies instead. But I knew that wasn't the real reason. My dad has always been overprotective of me, and I think he's afraid that something bad might happen to me if I go on the trip. I tried to reason with him and explain how important this trip was to me, but he wouldn't budge. He said that he didn't want me to go on any school field trips, period. I was devastated. All of my friends were going, and I felt like I was going to miss out on something incredible. As the day of the trip approached, I became more and more anxious. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was going to regret not going on this trip for the rest of my life. So I made a decision. I was going to sneak out and go on the trip anyway. I woke up early on the day of the trip and got dressed quietly. I tiptoed out of the house and made my way to the bus stop. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I waited for the bus to arrive. When it finally pulled up, I climbed aboard and tried to blend in with the other students. The trip was everything I had hoped it would be and more. I learned so much about history and art, and I had a blast hanging out with my friends. But the whole time, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was doing something wrong. I knew that my dad would be furious if he found out that I had gone on the trip against his wishes. When I got home that night, I was relieved to find that my dad wasn't waiting up for me. I went to bed feeling exhausted but exhilarated. I had done something that I had been told was impossible, and I had proven to myself that I was capable of making my own decisions. The next morning, however, everything changed. My dad was waiting for me when I came downstairs, and he was not happy. He yelled at me for disobeying him and for going on the trip without his permission. He said that he couldn't trust me anymore and that he was going to have to tighten the reins even more. I felt like I had let him down, but at the same time, I couldn't help feeling angry. Why couldn't he see that I was just trying to have a good time and learn something new? Why did he have to be so overprotective all the time? After that, things were tense between us for a while. I tried to apologize and make things right, but my dad was still upset with me. Eventually, though, we were able to move past it. We had a long talk about trust and responsibility, and I promised to never go on a school trip without his permission again. Looking back on it now, I can see that my dad was just trying to protect me. He loves me more than anything in the world, and he was afraid that something bad might happen to me if I went on the trip. But at the same time, I wish he could have trusted me to make my own decisions and learn from my own mistakes. It was a tough lesson to learn, but it taught me that sometimes we have to compromise with the people we love in order to maintain a healthy relationship. From that day on, I made an effort to communicate more openly with my dad. I talked to him about my interests and the things that mattered to me, and he began to see that I was growing up and becoming more responsible. I still wished I could go on more school field trips, but I knew that my dad had my best interests at heart. When you subscribe, be sure to click the notification bell. Click here for more Tangled threats.